Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. A lot of questions are being asked about the Russian campaign. A lot of propaganda is being spread across about what exactly is happening on the ground by both the sides. Naturally so. I'm here to actually look at what is happening with the Russian campaign in Ukraine. Are they actually losing the war or they are actually winning it? To discuss this, I have with me Lieutenant General Ravi Shankar, who's going to take us through the Russian situation and, of course, matching that with the objectives that the Russians had set out for themselves. Thank you, sir, for joining me. It's going to be an eye opener for discussion for a lot many that have been falling trap to the words that are going around by the media. So let's see where the Russians stand today, sir.
Thanks for inviting me over on this platform once again, Adi. This entire conflict has been fogged by information, and lastly, Western media has come up with a lot of information, which paints a picture which is a little away from the truth. On the other side, the Russians have just started coming out with their summaries. I think they've just put out one summary yesterday. But when both are trying to build up their side of the story. But when you see the whole thing in balance, a different picture comes out, right? And I'd like to decipher this whole picture to the best of my ability and where it is, and from what we can make out, right? So that's where it is. So we can start.
At the outset, we're not trying to, condone the invasion by any sort. I mean, I've actually said this before. I don't know if I've said this with General Shankar, but I've said this in another video that the Russians were winning the war when they were outside Ukraine. The minute they stepped inside, well, a lot was lost for the Russians as well. So, we're not trying to condone the invasion, but we're just trying to analyze what's happening on the ground and to actually get out a picture to realize what the future outcome of this battle would be. So I'd like to just open this discussion by asking you: the West has a very set narrative of how a war should kind of be fought. Of course, everybody would have that. Are the Western analysts judging this war according to their own style of fighting? That's just something that I was curious about.
See, first and foremost, I agree with you when you say this is an unnecessary war. The entire war, the way it could have been done a little differently. But having said that, we are in a situation, right? Okay, the West is not even seeing it the way it is done, or it would have done. The West is just painting a picture which is, everything is anti-Russian, and everything what Russia is doing is mindless or useless, and Russia is suffering major losses, and Ukraine is winning the war, right? But the reality is not that. The reality is also not that the Russians are getting away by winning, all out. So before we move ahead, we'll just see what is the current position on ground and on the map. I'll explain it in 2 minutes, and then we'll move ahead with the questions. Right. If you see this was the position as on 24th March. And the position hasn't changed. In fact, this is the position even around 11th, 12th March. If you see in the north, the red arrows are all of Russia. The blue lines, arcs, are where Ukraine has taken position or Ukrainian troops have taken position. All the red circles are those cities which Russia has, really captured. And the red circles with blue in it are those where Ukrainians are still fighting out with the city and, besieged. So in the north, if you see, the Russians have come up to the outskirts of Kiev and they're holding fort, right? And they're there and they're being resisted by Ukrainians. And further in the north, you see Chernihiv, which is an important nodal point on the advance. The Russians have bypassed it and moved ahead, but the Ukrainians are still holding on. On the east, you see Kharkiv, Again, Ukrainians are holding on to Kharkiv. The Russians have bypassed Kharkiv and they're moving further to the east. Now, when you come to the south, the Crimean Peninsula, from the Crimean Peninsula, the actual movement and success militarily, Russians have achieved in the south. Right? If you see, they had captured Kherson and they moved further north. And then that is to the west of the Crimean Peninsula. To the east of the Crimean Peninsula, they took on Melitopol, which they've captured. And then they further moved on to Mariupol. Mariupol is the place where currently fighting is going on. Simultaneously, from the Donbass area, right, and people have moved down south, from the Russian held or the rebel held area, and there's a link up likely to take place. And that link up cannot take place till Mariupol is held by Ukrainians. Now, here one has to, so this is where it is. And in this, Mariupol is important for one reason. Mariupol is the capital of the Donetsk region. So, if there's to be a Donetsk independent country or a nation or a region later on, right, Mariupol has to be captured by the the Russian-backed rebels. Right? That is why Mariupol is important. And if there's any one thing which the Russians won't give up is the capture of Mariupol. They've already put out a statement yesterday to say that their focus is on the east. Right? And they're going to consolidate the areas and they're not going to focus on the north. Okay. So this is where the situation is. At the end of the day, they might reach a situation where the Crimean Peninsula, Mariupol, Donbass area are all contiguous areas, right? Which they'll hold in strength, which the Ukrainians won't have the capability to retake. And you might see this being hived away from Ukraine. So Ukraine's map tomorrow might be without these areas, right? Right. This is what I'm speculating. Okay. But it will all depend on the final deal which comes out.
Thank you, sir, for the rundown of the map. I think a lot of people have tried to speculate what the actual objective of the Russians would have been. People speculated Kiev, then they speculated Mariupol. A lot of speculations talked about Odessa, and each one of these cities create a different scenario. But today, as you're saying, Mariupol is like the center of attention. So, how do you think they opened out their campaign, and the course of their campaign? What changes did they make? Apart from that, what are the perceptions that have built up because of these changes that the Russians had made for their campaigns?
See, in the first 28 to 48 hours, it was a headlong rush, right? It was a shock and awe kind of a campaign. That was the first phase. That's the initial cycle of this campaign was shock and awe, which didn't work. And I don't think the Russians had a backup plan to this because they expected everything to happen as per the initial plan. So then they started moving their ground forces. And that's the second phase, which started around, say, 27th, 28th of February, when the first 3 days got over and they found that they were not making headway and Kiev was not going to fall. Like in the earlier cases when they took over Crimea and Donetsk and all that, there was no Ukrainian resistance. So then the second phase, the mobile phase or the advanced phase of the operation started, the second cycle. And that lasted till about 10th of March. When they came up to these areas, there were a lot of fighting, no issue, but there were a lot. Okay. And then after that, there's been no movement. And now they've gone into an attrition phase of the battle. Okay, and the normal expectation in the West is that people expected Russia to capture the towns. They expected Kiev to fall, which the Russians probably never wanted. Also, it was very clear that the Russia itself, because they had put in a new plan in motion, they didn't know how to execute it. Their training was not there. They had not planned for it. Part of the reason was end February, March is when you cannot do in fact, March, April, May, you cannot do cross-country movement in Ukraine because of the thaw. It's called rapustitsa. That is, the mud becomes boggy, right? So movement is road bound. So the Russians were road bound and they got bogged down. And if you remember, there was a 60-kilometer convoy stuck behind Kiev. Okay. Now we'll just talk 2 minutes about that 60-kilometer convoy. By the time this convoy was discovered hanging around in this thing, the Ukrainian effectiveness was gone, in my assessment. I mean, just think, if you had some degree of air force, some artillery, some long range reach, some combat potential, 60 kilometers convoy on a road where it can't move off, packed bumper to bumper, is a sitting target, sitting duck. You lob a grenade anywhere, people will die. And yet, nothing happened to that convoy. So, Ukrainian forces were not that strong as it is being made out. So, but Ukrainian forces were strong enough to defend the towns, defend the approaches with what they had. Okay. And that gave time for the Russians to come in, shake in, and get into these positions. Whereas in the south, they made very good progress. They took Kherson, then they took Melitopol, then they moved up to Mariupol. They also went to Zaporozhye, where the nuclear plant was there. They've taken over that nuclear plant. If you remember, the nuclear plant, was on some part of it was under fire and all that, right? And then the Russians actually changed tack. Initially, when they felt, probably initially they might have come with their own ideas of capturing cities. But when they found that their convoys are stuck and they're not making any headway, probably they changed their plan again. And that was the time, if you remember, Mr. Putin had said, given these 4 conditions, right? That first condition was NATO, Ukraine should not be part of NATO. Second, Donetsk and Luhansk should be independent states, recognized as independent states. Crimea should be recognized as part of Russian territory. And the fourth was demilitarization of Ukraine. And he said, these 4 conditions are met, I'll end the war tomorrow. Somewhere around the 10th or 11th of March, right? The Russian plan till then, which was quite hazy, we didn't know what they were doing. Probably even they didn't know what they were doing. They came into a focus, this is what we'll achieve. And they started matching their political aim with their military plan. And from then on, they've been doing it very systematically. Okay. So we will go one by one. Now, when you talk of NATO, how does, Ukraine not become part of NATO? This they ensured from the beginning. The moment they said, anyone interfering, I'll use the nuclear option, NATO had no choice but to keep out of the equation. They never came. Right? Then NATO said, we'll give Javelin missiles, they'll give Stingers, they'll give man-portable equipment and all that. Now, all that equipment had to come from Poland through certain depots and all that. So the Russians knew about it. And what did the Russians do? They carried out cruise missile strikes, they carried out other strikes, they carried out even hypersonic missile strikes and air strikes on all these areas in the western Ukraine, like Zhytomyr, Lviv, right, Lutsk, all these places, right, they were known depots and training places where they were training with NATO and supplies were coming. They plastered them, okay, and they came perilously close to Poland, but they ensured that they would not cross that area into NATO for any strike. That kept NATO out of the picture. And then, by then it was very clear that, they'll never be part of NATO and NATO will not come here. So NATO got isolated, right? And then by then, Mr. Zelensky himself had said, we are no more interested in NATO. Right? He also stated at that time, yeah, we can negotiate about Donetsk and Luhansk, right? But he has not agreed so far to Crimea being part of Russia, and demilitarization also he had not agreed, because he felt that if he looks at demilitarization, it amounts to surrender, which he was not prepared to do. So Russia has carried out these actions. Now, if you see the third aim of Crimea, Donetsk to be hived away from Ukraine, which I've just mentioned, moment that happens, the second and third condition of Mr. Putin is arrived. And that is what today the focus is on. Right? When Russia says we'll focus on the south, what is it? What are they doing? Their war termination objectives were to Donetsk and Luhansk to be independent and Crimea to be recognized as part of Russia. The moment Mariupol falls, which it will fall in a day, 2, 3 days, because that's where they're concentrating their effort on. So that area, the second objective is reached. Now we'll come to the fourth objective. Second and the third objective is reached. Fourth objective is demilitarization of Ukraine. Now this Russia has done very systematically. First, they took out all these western bases of Ukraine where they could get help from NATO through airstrikes and cruise missiles. Then they carried out 2 hypersonic attacks on a fuel dump and an ammunition dump. Now, with this hypersonic attack, they gave a signal to NATO that, look, we can penetrate your A2AD, that is area anti-access, anti-denial, right? Anti-access area denial, right? Any air defense equipment will penetrate. And after that, it was only use of the nuclear card. And they said, we won't hesitate to do that if you interfere, right? And simultaneously, they were reducing military capability of Ukraine. Yeah. Also, all defense industrial complexes of Ukraine were hit and finished off. Like that Antonov factory, the Zoria factory, which makes gas turbines for ships. All these were taken off. Then they got after all the rocket and missile systems and firepower assets of Ukraine. Now, they had a double approach. They would actually, the moment a rocket launcher or a missile opened up from Ukraine, they would engage it, return fire. Alternately, they would wait, use drones to track these vehicles. Then they went back to the base and they were hitting the base. Right? Where the base would have ammunition and everything. So that's how they've been demilitarizing. And of course, whatever hand-to-hand combat, etc., etc., etc. So this is how they've matched their military plan with their objectives. The moment they get to Mariupol, they would probably be very close to what their whole idea is. In the process, in the past 1 month, irrespective of the losses which Russia has suffered, they are in a position where the logistics must have been sorted out by now, and they're stable. So they've reached a position of military stability, and whatever their war termination aims are, they'll on the verge of achieving them. Mind you, this is absolutely a cold analysis. Okay, no. Day by day, as it continues, Ukraine forces are getting depleted. Their combat potential is getting depleted, and they cannot reinforce themselves.
That's true.
Right? The Western leaders have said, we can't give you tanks, we can't give you artillery, we can't give you aircraft. We'll only give you handheld systems. With handheld systems, you can't do much. There's a limit to what you can do. Right? On the Russian side, whatever losses they are suffering, they are able to, they can replace. So their combat potential won't go down. Their overall combat potential, if you see, Russia might have lost a few aircraft, there's no doubt. But I don't think they've committed their air force. If they had committed their air force, there would be far more destruction. Their navy has not been committed. Russia has not attacked any city with their infantry. So their infantry is intact. They only used artillery. They moved artillery. They only used firepower.
Long ranges.
And a few cruise missiles and only 2 hypersonic missiles. So Russian combat power is fully intact. If I know Russia well, by now they would have probably in the mode of making up all what they have expended. So this is where the situation is. Now you can ask questions.
No, as a matter of fact, that's a very interesting thing, sir, because if you look at both of the armies, the Russian army has a huge capacity of replenishment, whereas the Ukrainian army would not have that much.
Yeah, they don't have. They're almost nil.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be putting in conscripts and or lightly trained.
Hey, how much? Look,
How many?
you can't. This how much? How much can you do? Right? How can people with rifles fight a tank or a artillery?
My second observation with what you're saying and looking at the map is Mariupol is something that the Russians also say that they're pounding it to smithereens. So it's basically going to become a useless town for.
Look, whether it's a useless town whether it's a useless town or not, that will be finished off. Even if they have to rebuild it, they will rebuild it. There are 2 reasons. A lot of these so-called Nazis, the Dachau battalion is hanging around Mariupol defending it. So they will, kill them. There's no doubt about it. They'll finish them off. The second, Mariupol is the capital of Donetsk region.
Yes.
They'll take it. If Donetsk has to be a independent state, Mariupol is important. The third reason is Mariupol is an important port.
Sea of Azov.
Yeah. So Black Sea of Azov, if Russia needs that for its Black Sea fleet, they'll take it. As simple as that.
And a lot of people will not believe the Nazi thing, which is termed as Russian propaganda. I'd like to actually invite people to actually look at the documentaries made by Vice, made by PBS, made by many other Western platforms on these pro-Nazi movements in Ukraine pre and post 2014. So there's a lot of
there are, and I mean, let's not get into that. There is a problem. That's a problem for political problem for Ukraine to resolve. So yeah.
Just city fighting, we can. You also said that the infantry charges and infantry, street to street infantry attacks. We've not seen any videos of that. We've seen a video of tanks getting busted, this, that, all that stuff from both the sides. We've not seen soldiers running across streets and throwing grenades and those machine guns firing and this and that. Typical street battle, which we remember from the Second World War, and many wars after that as well. The Battle of Mosul and so on and so forth. Is it the fact that Russians are, not wanting to go inside there because obviously it's going to be a difficult task for them to do? And also the interpretation of the Russians not wanting to go into the city, is it being put as a loss for the Russians?
See, we are talking of capturing cities. Most of our experts and many Indian experts, many of our Indian generals, so Russia has not done anything. They've not been able to capture cities. My question to most is, did Russia want to capture them in the first place? I mean, our expectation is that Russia wanted to capture them, but Russia probably did not want to capture them. Look, for the past 10 days, wherever I've been going, I've been telling this only. That I don't think Russia is attempting to capture a city. The only city which it has seriously attempted to capture is Mariupol. The rest, if it has fallen, otherwise they're not bothered, whether it's Kharkiv or Kiev. They also know that it takes a lot of effort and infantry, which they don't have to capture these cities. It's not only capturing the cities. Firstly, you have to do built-up area fighting, and then you have to hold it. And then you go get into a guerrilla operation. Okay. Why should they do it? And what is their aim? Again, most of us, traditional thinkers, that without infantry, you can't do this operation. Just firepower alone won't win you the operation. Traditionally, I agree. If you think traditionally, conventionally, yes, that's what the Westerners also thought. But the Russians are not doing that. The Russians are using firepower to systematically destroy Ukrainian military capability. Okay, in the initial rush, whatever they got in the south, they've got. Now they're only consolidating. They're not committing. They've posed a threat. If you see, for the past 10 days, they're hanging behind at every built-up area. They're not heading into this thing.
Yeah, 5 kilometers from Kiev, 6 kilometers.
Yeah, why? They're not entering. They've just posed a threat. When the focus was there, they were doing something else.
So also to create panic, sir.
Yeah, panic, everything. So the people are focusing on the expectation that Russia will capture these cities, and they were not interested.
And that's something Putin has also said. I'm not wanting to take over Ukraine.
Yeah, he's also said, look, again, many of us in the Western world, we expected Russia to do as per type. We didn't pay attention to what Mr. Putin was saying. Look, if you go from the beginning, he said, I don't want to take over Ukraine. I know Ukraine. I respect Ukraine. We thought it was a joke. He was only interested in these three things. He was interested in Donetsk and Luhansk to be independent, which he declared before he got in. Okay. Crimea to be part of Russia, which he declared. Now that additional part will be lost, which links Crimea with Donetsk.
Passage sort of a thing.
Okay. And from the beginning, his major aim was denazification and demilitarization. We never understood what denazification was. Fine, chalo. We don't even know whether Nazis are there or what his concept of Nazis are there. But demilitarization, he's done it.
He's doing, yeah.
He doesn't want NATO to come in. Neither will NATO come into Ukraine, nor will any Ukrainian go to NATO for the next 50 years. Yeah. Will you? You know there's consequences of even attempting to go to things. So where do you go? Look, there's another thing, there's a lot of noise made about Russian losses. Russia has lost 12,000 to 15,000 people. Over 1,000 tanks lost. 100 aircraft, 105 aircraft lost. I mean, someone had to think, is it right? Is it feasible? 15,000 people going as half a division plus 2 brigades washed out. उतना तो यूक्रेन का फौज नहीं होगा. And if so many people have died, where is the scenes of casualty evacuation? People, dead bodies would have surfaced. Attack would have taken place. Nothing has come. Just because someone has reported, people have believed, and you see it splashed in New York Times.
Who's counting them, sir?
That's a different story. But that figure is 15,000 means 15,000 has to be substantiated by fact and data and physical. If 15,000 people die, that means every day 500 people have died in the past 30 days. That's a hell of a lot of casualties. Just on the Russian side. What about the Ukrainian side?
When there are hardly any face-to-face contacts.
Yeah. And you just think the official figure put out by UN is 1,500 odd or so of civilian casualties. With just 1,500 civilian casualties after all this shelling and all that, how can 15,000 people, Russians, die? Is there logic? Okay. 104 aircraft, there's 5 squadrons of aircraft.
Yeah, it's a lot.
If 5 squadrons of Indian Air Force goes, Indian Air Force is down there, virtually.
They're all 4.5 plus generation.
Yeah. 1,000 tanks. There's 20 battalions, 45 tanks to a unit, 20 regiments. Are we joking? I mean, it's not believable. Okay, let's look at it a slightly different manner. Okay, if you have destroyed as Ukraine so much, why is Mr. Zelensky going all around the world saying, now no-fly zone laga do, mere ko weapons de do? Even yesterday, he spoke to NATO and asked weapons. He wants resting. With those manpower, manpack stuff which is given, if with just the manpack equipment, so many losses could have taken place to Russia, then Ukraine must be a super trained force. They don't need anything. So there is a lot of, and many of us have fallen for that. I don't blame the normal citizen to that he cannot discern the difference between what is propaganda, what is the truth. But many military professionals have fallen for it.
That's the aim of propaganda, so at the end of it.
Well, yeah, and many military professionals from the West have propagated this propaganda. Right? So, yeah.
But there are voices coming out, sir, today. As a matter of fact, there are a whole lot of ex-US Army people who are coming out and saying what is being reported is wrong.
Yes.
It's there on various public platforms. It's there in write-ups. It's there in articles and stuff like that, which now is also presenting a second side of the story. I'd like to, as my final part of this question, sir, I'd like to ask you about when you realize that you're putting out a particular narrative about a certain loss for your adversary. It's also quite detrimental to your own self because you'll end up start believing that narrative. And when you see the opposite happening on the ground, it is going to be a big morale, loss for the Ukrainian army. And that's very dangerous, if I may say so.
Look, information is a double-edged sword.
Yes.
Right? My own view is that Ukraine and Mr. Zelensky have overplayed this information. Now it's become cutting them.
Yeah.
They have shown so much loss, which is not there. Now, if you propagate so much loss happening, your own people are listening to it. They'll say, look, we are a defeated nation. Everyone, and at the same time, you say, despite the loss, I'll do this, I'll do that. When there are no matching weapons on ground, what will be the effect on morale?
Horrible.
So, this information, I think, see, till a point of time, the information campaign of the West and Ukraine was fantastic. There's no doubt about it. But now, in fact, for the past 4-5 days, it is becoming that propaganda is becoming counterproductive.
Unbelievable, yes.
Right? You have information is a thing where you have to just put something out which the other person believes. And if you put more than that, people will not believe it. Like the Russia communist propaganda. Utna aa jata hai, like a torrent, no one will believe it. If you put it below par information, again, you are at. So I think this information is a new game which we have to learn in India because we are on the negative side. We don't put out information. Similarly, the Russians have just started understanding the value of information, that they should get their side of the story out. Yesterday was their first press release, 1 page. Right? But that's good enough. 1 page is also information. But till now, they were losing that battle. Right? They've also probably sensed that the information campaign by the West has overplayed itself. And professionals in the West have started asking questions.
Yes. I feel sorry for the Ukrainians, sir, and I feel sorry for the soldier barely trained for a month or two fighting a army because he's being told something that you're winning and you're winning and you're winning. It reminds me of 1971 on the day of the surrender. The Western Pakistan was being still told that bas abhi jeetne wale hain, bas kal tak khatam ho jayega and all that.
See, rightly someone said in the beginning that NATO and USA will fight for Ukraine till the last Ukrainian. That's what they're doing. Somehow, this whole propaganda is to show a NATO victory, but that we'll talk about later.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of lessons that will come out once the fighting stops, and I'm sure we'll be able to cover that at that time. But it is important for us to decipher what is happening on the ground rather than actually look at the propaganda. The Russians have been speaking, so have the Ukrainians, and a lot of the Ukrainians are now starting to talk a lot of sense. As a matter of fact, if you follow some of their accounts online, they are now asking the government to let's get to a point where we can stop because they're
Yeah,
destroying. It's a lose situation for Ukraine, and
yeah, I
nobody is
agree with
winning
you.
this war. No one.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, I think it doesn't matter who wins the military battle, the Ukrainians, the Russians, and NATO all will end up losing. There's a lose lose situation. I've already written about it.
So thank you so much for putting these thoughts together, the analysis, because it's important, as I said, to learn what is happening on the ground, to make our own decisions, and not fall trap for the propaganda what is there from either side, the Russian or the Ukrainian, because the Russians are also going to modify the numbers. Thank you so much once again. Till next time, sir. Another subject. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind. Thank you.